There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 376. And today we are hearing from 6 different whitetail experts on the ins and outs of hunting deer during the month of October. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by Onyx. Today we're celebrating the month of October. It's here, and let me tell you what, I am really excited about it. That's no surprise, I suppose. To anyone listening, I'm sure you're pretty excited as well. This is an amazing time of year. I just wrote an article actually over at the Meat Eater website in which I made the claim that October is the most interesting month of the entire hunting season. And I say this because it's this month full of tension and anticipation. It's just like the analogy I used is a roller coaster that, you know, that first hill of a roller coaster when you're just slowly going up and there's that click, 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 click as you get closer and closer and closer and closer to the top. And then you get to the very top and it's, oh my God, it's about to just drop out from underneath me. That feeling, that rise, that's what October is like for me. That month just slowly builds toward the rut. And you know, at any second now, things could just go crazy, but you don't know when that's going to be. It might not be till the very end of the month, but it could also be October 3rd when a big cold front comes pushing through and the woods just lights up, or that first early doe comes into heat on October 15th and all of a sudden it's nuts. That can happen at any point. And even if that doesn't happen, it's just this slow, steady rise of testosterone in the bucks and excitement for all of us. And each day it's going to be different. Speaking of that difference, there's just this incredible diversity to the month where, you know, what's going on October 1st is very different from what's going on and from how you should hunt on October 15th, which then again is even more different from what you're doing on October 31st. There's almost 3 different hunting seasons just within the month of October. So for all of those reasons, I wanted to take a step back today and kind of try to get a big picture strategy session going on for all things October. And to do that, I wanted to use a diverse set of voices and a bunch of different ideas here. And I'm lucky we have that kind of resource right at our fingertips here on the Wired Hunt podcast, because we've been doing these things, having these conversations with the best of the best in the whitetail world for 7 years now. Myself and Dan Johnson, we got this thing cracking in the spring of 2014. So we've been doing this for what seems like a lifetime. And what I've realized, though, is that more recently here, a lot of you who've just joined us in the past couple of years, you've missed out on a lot of really good stuff from those early podcasts, some really foundational conversations back in 2014, 15, 16, and it really hasn't seen the light of day compared to our recent things. So here's my game plan for this one. I've gone back through our archives and selected 6 different whitetail experts from those early episodes who covered various aspects of hunting in October. I went back and listened to those, and I handpicked a selection of excerpts from those conversations. And sometimes those are 5 minutes, sometimes it's 20 minutes. But when pieced together between these 6 different people, you get this very interesting, very varied, very varied. What I'm trying to say is very diverse set of ideas for hunting throughout the upcoming month. Now, keep in mind, when you're listening to this set of excerpts and these different people, you're going to hear some conflicting ideas. One person's going to say one thing, the next person might say something completely the opposite. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's an interesting and good thing. And if you've listened to this podcast over the years, I've said this time and time again, I'm going to say it again. There are a million different ways to skin this cat, that being hunting and killing deer. There's a lot of different ways to do it. And you can have totally different ideas from one person to the next, and they can both be very successful. So I love comparing and contrasting these different sets of strategies and circumstances. So when you listen to this, listen to these people, think about the circumstances that they're in, the types of places they're hunting, the way that they hunt, and then compare and contrast that to what you have in what your situation is. Do you hunt public or private? Do you hunt big farms or small farms? Do you hunt, do you have a lot of time to hunt or just a few days to hunt? Think about those things as you listen to these people. And I think that's going to help you figure out what's the best set of ideas to pull from this to apply to your own hunts. Now, here's who's up to bat today. We're going to hear from Gordon Whittington, Dan Infalt, Bernie Barringer, Jeff Sturgis, Adam Hayes, and Mark Drury, in that order. Now, keep in mind, these are just little pulls from much larger conversations. So if you're intrigued with any one of these excerpts, I'd really encourage you to go back, search for the full episode with each person, and give those a listen. When we get to the beginning of each different person, I'm going to mention who it is and then what number that episode is, so you can easily go back into your podcast app and find that one. These are way back there, so you have to do a little searching. But man, every one of these is really good in their own way, so I would definitely recommend you do that. Before that, though, I guess one last thing I want to do, I want to give you a few things to think about from my perspective as someone who sat here for 7 years now, hearing from all of these folks and more, and trying to synthesize all of this down into a few guiding principles. I don't claim to be on the same level as any of these guys, but I think if any of you have followed along since the beginning, I've had a cool opportunity to take all these different tips and tactics and ways of hunting, take it all in, and guinea pig some of these things myself. So for whatever it's worth, here's a few of my high-level October hunting 101 pointers, I guess. A few of the big, if I were writing an article or if I were writing a book even on hunting October, these might be 4 really important chapters of that book. So I'm going to give you the high level on that. That'll be a good starting point. And then from there, I'm going to send you in to these in-depth, much more detailed conversations with these 6 people. So here's my starting points for October. Number 1, if you have an October 1st opener, like we do in Michigan, you've got a really unique opportunity coming up, right? If you're listening to this on the day this podcast drops, it is October 1st. And those first couple of days of the month represent one of your very best chances of the entire season. And, if you had a September 15th opener, you had that special opportunity on September 15th. If you had a September 1 opener, et cetera, et cetera. But for those of us listening today in Michigan or elsewhere, Illinois, there's a whole bunch of states opening right now. Those first couple of days of the month represent this special chance because these deer have not been heavily pressured up to this point. So I love taking a big swing on one of those first couple days. These deer are still acting relatively normal. They're still much more daylight active than they might be a week or two from now, and they're on those patterns. To a degree, they're still on a bedding to feeding pattern. So what you want to do is have as much information at your fingertips as possible. Maybe that's trail camera images. Maybe that is actual long-distance observations that you're doing in the nights leading up to the opener. Maybe this is historical data, sightings and pictures from last year and the year before. But take whatever information you have to put together the very best guess at where you think that buck or bucks in general would be feeding right now because it's really a food game in early October. You need to know what that top food source is and then take an aggressive swing into the very best spot you can think of given that. So again, you need to identify what the number one food source is right now and get as close to that food source and to wherever the best bedding is, where you've come to find bucks or bedding. Try to get in between that and aggressively put yourself in the best position. Again, I like to go for that top option right now because, again, you've got a little window here, October 1st, October 2nd, maybe the 3rd. And then if there's a lot of pressure around you, by the 10th, 11th, it could be a totally different ballgame. So take that aggressive swing at the top food source right now. Now, as I mentioned, things can quickly change. And as you're going to hear from a bunch of people coming up, and as I'm sure many of you have heard in the past, there's this thing that a lot of people refer to as the October lull, right? People say, well, once you get into October, the second week, third week, even, once you get into past the first couple days of October, you're going to get this October lull, which a lot of people see as this decrease in daylight deer activity. Because of that, a lot of people don't like to hunt during mid-October or will just hunt does in mid-October or whatever. Here's my perspective on this, is that it's not so much a lull as it is a shift. You have, studies have shown, a steady increase in deer activity and buck activity throughout the month. But that's not necessarily what a lot of people see. And that's because after the first week of October or so, a bunch of things are changing in the woods. Number one, a lot more deer hunters. Number two, a lot of changing food sources, right? If you hunt in ag land, farm country, your beans are drying down and not as attractive anymore. Corn is drying down and becoming more attractive. You probably have a lot of acorns possibly dropping. You're going to have other soft-mast trees like apple trees starting to drop apples in certain parts of the country. Not only that, but you've got leaf cover dropping across the country as it gets colder. So you have changing food sources and changing cover also coinciding with more hunting pressure. All that just means a lot of change in deer activity. They're going to react to those changes. They're going to adjust to where the hunting pressure is. So this just means there's a lot of movement, not that you're going to see, but movement in patterns. So these bucks might still be daylight active. They might still be on your property, but because of some of these changes, because of hunting pressure, whatever it is, they might just be doing this closer to their bedding areas. Or maybe they're not hitting that big old bean field that you saw them on a month ago, but they're hitting acorns in the timber. You've got one of two options in my mind for the middle of October, this October shift time frame. I'm going to say this is October 7th through October 21st, maybe, give or take. I think if you don't know your area, or if you are relatively inexperienced, or if you just don't have a strong handle on how deer react to those changes I just described, this might be a time to play it a little more safe. Hunt the edges, observe, maybe target does. Maybe if you've got like one small property that's your best stuff, maybe you don't hunt your best stuff right now. Maybe you go and hunt some nearby public land and experiment, try different things, get aggressive there, but without blowing out your honey hole quite yet. That's if you don't have a strong handle on your spots. But if you do have a strong handle, or if you are really experienced, you know your properties well, you've scouted, you know where these bucks are bedding. If you have that kind of intelligence, I'm not saying like IQ, I'm saying like intel, like scouting information. If you have that kind of stuff, it can be a good time to get aggressive because these bucks are still on a pattern. They are still tight to their core areas. So if you know that stuff, they're killable. You'll hear from people like Dan Infalt, who this is a great time for them because they know where those buck bedrooms are and they go in tight and they hit those things hard and they can have success. So you either play it safe or you have to be very aggressive to get into these spots where these bucks are still daylight active. It's just high risk, high reward. So think about that. Number 3, October really is a month of playing the weather game. You can have a situation that just happened here a few days ago. So this is a little bit pre-October, but just, the very last couple days of September, we had a big cold front pass through here in Michigan, and it just lit up the woods. I mean, I was glassing an area last night, and I saw 8 or 9 different bucks on their feet 2 hours before dark, a full hour plus earlier than I've seen any of these bucks moving until this front hit. And then bam, here they are, including a mature buck. There was sparring. there was scraping, and it was directly linked in my mind to this big 25-degree temperature drop. So when you get those big temperature drops, you gotta jump on them. You gotta go and take advantage of them. Most of my month of October is predicated on when this good weather comes through. When it's warm and cruddy, I might still hunt, but I'm not going to hunt my good stuff. But when the good fronts push through, I'm going to take my swings. That's when I'm going to strike. Okay? And finally, speaking of strikes, this last portion of the month, that last 10 days or so, really the last 6 or 7 days of the month, if I'm drilling down even further, this is one of your very best chances of the year in my mind. You've got this moment, and you're going to hear Mark Drury talk about this, where you have two things coming together in a special way. You've got bucks that are still hanging tight to their core areas, and they're still on a little bit of a pattern. So if you know a buck, or if you know where a couple bucks are spending a lot of time, and you've got history with these deer and you know your property well, you can still have confidence that they're going to do that thing. They're still going to be in that area you know, but that pattern is overlapping. Think of like a Venn diagram where this overlap is. This is overlapping also with the beginning of the rut. So you've got this super high testosterone. You've got bucks that are looking for the first doe. Maybe the first doe does come into heat. That's all happening while these bucks are still hanging out in that area that you know. So you can kill these bucks in the spots you know while they're still hanging out in the spots you can hunt, and they're getting a little frisky early. 10 days later, November 7th, this pattern can be blown up. Now they're doing crazy things. Now they're running all over the place. These bucks are roaming a mile down the road instead of right near 40 acres. So take advantage of that last window in October. Take a surgical strike into these spots where you know these bucks are living, but now you've got the chance they're going to move an hour early. And if somehow you can get that cold front that hits in late October, holy smokes, get in there, cancel work, cancel dinner plans, whatever you got to do, that's the good stuff right there. So those are 4 high-level October ideas to think about over the next 31 days. There's a lot more we're going to get into with these next 6 people, though. A lot of good ideas. We're going to kind of bounce around a lot. You're going to hear about, should you hunt mornings or not? You're going to hear, what do you think about the October lull? You're going to hear about different stand ideas you should think about. You're going to hear about different weather conditions and how these guys think about them during October. A lot of different stuff. But keep in mind these 4 high-level ideas. Keep in mind what I said in the very beginning. Try to cherry pick what you can use from all these different things. And finally, as we get through this, these are interviews I described, as I mentioned, from 2014, 15, 16. This is a long time ago. So you're going to hear myself and Dan Johnson, who helped me out with a lot of these early episodes. You're going to hear us asking some questions or even sharing some of our perspectives that might be different than what I think right now. So anything I say during these old school interviews, take with a grain of salt. This is young Mark. This is old Mark. This is old Dan. And you'll hear me call Dan Dallas too. That was his old nickname. We're going to get a little old school here. But when you're hearing from our guests, it's some good stuff. It's some varied stuff. And I guess, as I'm building all this up, you don't want to hear from me anymore. Let's stop with the Mark Kenyon rambling. Let's get into our 6 expert opinions, our October masterclass, and we're going to kick this off with Gordon Whittington of North American Whitetail Magazine. For the 15 minutes actually before you came onto the show with us, me and Dan were just talking about our October hunting woes, all the things that have gone wrong for us and how we have not killed a deer yet. And it's kind of what I wanted to start our conversation with, Gordon, was just about some of the challenges of hunting this time of year. We're entering, and we've all heard it 1,000 times, we're entering this period of the season that many people refer to as the October lull. I guess maybe, what do you think about that, Gordon? Is there such a thing? Do you believe that the October lull is that fact or fiction?
Well, I think there is no question that at various times of the fall, and really year-round, obviously, but during the time of year when hunting is legal, we all know there are times of year when your probability of seeing a mature buck on his feet in legal shooting light are better than others. It depends on habitat, weather, moon phase, but mostly hunting pressure, to some extent habitat type. there's all these different factors involved, deer densities, so many things. But I would say that in general, if you talk to the guys who have, let's say, like in Michigan, October 1 bow opener, Illinois that way, right around October 1 at least, you've got, the deer have been out of velvet for 3 weeks to a month. The bucks are, of course, somewhat reclusive and solitary, really, when they come out of velvet. They come out of their bachelor groups. They really go into a short travel pattern. They don't move much in daylight. Even if they're not spooked or being hunted, they're not moving a long way to food. And, maybe out in the prairie of Wyoming, you've got deer walking 2 miles to an alfalfa field and back, even in early season. But for the most part, in most habitats, you have deer on a very short travel pattern. And that's, compounded by the fact that then suddenly we get the acorns and the other fall mass that starts to come into play. And that's mostly back in the woods. And we're trying to kill these deer on the edges because we don't want to penetrate their sanctuaries, and yet their sanctuaries might literally have acorns dropping into their bedding areas as those deer are lying there waiting for dark. Well, that deer's got very little incentive unless he's really thirsty. He's got very little incentive to get up and move much in daylight. And I think if you look at radio telemetry and you look at all the different GPS studies that have been done on wild deer, you'll see that mature bucks just have a very short travel pattern at this time of year. So there aren't, if you have the terminus, let's say, is a food plot, and it may be the best food plot in the county, and you may have the best bedding area 200 yards away from there in a swamp or something, if that buck is in that swamp and he's going to that food plot at night, he's got very little ground to cover to get there, and he can get on his feet right at dark, stretch a little bit, rub his rack a couple of times, and then prance right out to the food plot, and he's already too late for you to kill him. Now, that's just a fact of life. That, hunting pressure didn't necessarily cause that. It might have accentuated that pattern, but it didn't really cause it. He's just got no incentive to get there early. He's also got no incentive to stay there after daylight in the morning. By the time you got daylight coming over the food plot, he's normally back in a place where you can't get him killed. So these are just realities. And he's not very responsive to rattling or calling, generally speaking. You don't want to do a deer drive. There's all sorts of things that you're not going to do in early season that otherwise might compensate for that lack of mobility on his part or a lack of a daytime pattern. You put all that together, and that's a really long-winded way of saying they're hard to kill. Now, but we understand why they're hard to kill. They're just not on their feet much in daylight. And I don't know what you can ultimately do to change that pattern very much. Trail cameras clearly have made it easier for us to pinpoint those locations where they're spending time, but you have to be very careful not to blow the deer out, either checking cameras or going in to hunt that spot. And a lot of guys just get so impatient in early season. They're just like, oh, man, this fall's finally here. I've been waiting all year to get in the tree. I'm going. Well, the wind's not quite right. I'm going anyway. I got to go. It's Saturday. I'm going. Well, you can go and blow him out and not see him again for 3 months and have your neighbor kill him 3 weeks later. And that's a lot of times is just the reality of what happens is that we just don't have the discipline to wait for better conditions.
So would you typically recommend, let's say we've got someone who's hunting in that type of scenario you just listed there, where he's not getting daylight trail camera pictures of a buck, he's not seeing daylight activity from a buck yet because of that situation, right? This buck doesn't need to travel very far. Maybe he hasn't been overly pressured yet, but he just doesn't have that incentive to move during daylight. So that's our scenario. Mm-hmm. Would you tell this person, or I guess, would you typically think this type of person should wait until the rut, or are there some things that they should do now to try to still make it happen?
I would go to a separate area and try to get my doe shot. That's the first thing I would focus on. If I can't get him shot in the setup that I feel is most likely to produce an opportunity in the first time or 2 or 3 that I sit there during the earliest days of season and catch him unaware and possibly get him shot before he knows the season is even open. If I can't do that, I'm going to pull out. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to try to get my doe shot, or to be honest with you, for many of us, I'm going to try to get all my jobs done around the house so that when prime time gets here, I can spend more time in the woods. And I do think that's some of it's a function of time allocation. We all have limited time, even those of us who hunt, quote, for a living. We all still have other things in our life we have to do, and the worst thing in the world is to put all those off, hunt hard in October, mess up your spot, then come the 5th of November and realize you're behind on your honeydews, and then have to spend 3 days in prime time catching up so that you can then go and chase deer again. I mean, I think sometimes we just don't have a really good game plan. And because of that, that's not to say people don't kill big ones in October, early to mid-October. They certainly do. I mean, there's been some big ones killed the last, couple of weeks all over North America. But the number of people hunting relative to the number of big deer opportunities is a pretty skewed ratio.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's hard to argue with that. It's definitely possible, but at the same time, it's challenging. And at least from everything I've ever learned and from all the different people we've talked to on this podcast, I think, one of the big things it comes down to is, there's certain types of conditions or certain little weak spots in a big buck's armor of sorts that you can take advantage of if you have that perfect scenario for it. But 8 times out of 10, either you don't have that scenario or you don't have all the intel that you need to make a smart move or whatever it might be. 8 times out of 10, usually the smarter bet is to wait until those right conditions, because to your point, when you start pushing in there and doing things before the time's right, before the scenario is right, you're just going to muck things up before you ever even had a chance. And then when you might have had that better chance, maybe in late October or November or whatever it is, or when the cold front comes through, now you can't take advantage of that because you've already educated that buck. And that's a tough lesson to learn.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I could never blame anybody for saying, look, I just flat enjoy being in the deer woods, and even if it messes up my chances of killing the big one, I want to go. Well, how on earth could you tell a guy that you shouldn't go? I mean,
right.
Deer hunting is supposed to be fun, and if that's fun to him, and he's legal and safe and ethical, then good for him. I mean, I hope he shoots one, but if he doesn't shoot one, I at least know that he was out there, exercising his right and the privilege to go hunting and be part of the American hunting force that we're all so proud of. So I don't really, and it's hard for me to bash that guy and say, oh, you're crazy or you're not being smart. I mean, I would like for him to see the payoff for doing things a little different way, but I'm never going to bash him because he made a, quote, poor decision and educated the buck that he might have otherwise shot. I mean, that's his call, not mine.
Yeah. Now, given your position, with North American Whitetail Magazine, you get to hear a lot of different perspectives from other writers and hunters who do sometimes push it a little bit more in October and have success. Are there any standout tactics that you have seen from some of these other guys who do like to focus on October that either intrigue you the most or that you think have the most merit?
Well, I think if you got control of your land and habitat to where you can have, number one, a very relaxed deer herd, and go out of your way to minimize the pressure on those deer so that you can wait for that little cool front that really gets the buck a little bit more active, a little earlier in the evening coming out to the plot. And you've got a plot set up so that you've got places between bedding and feeding where you can get him shot. I do feel like if you can almost landscape your property or your hunting area that way, or put the scouting in to find those situations, that clearly that's going to give you an advantage over the guy who's just randomly going to go say, well, there's acorns falling here and there's some deer pellets, I think I'll sit here. He might kill the new world record, but the chances are better for the guy who's actually got a plan, as we all know. So I look at it and say, if you can find that, a place where deer are pushed a little bit more into a travel pattern because of topography, changing crops, possibly, you got isolated food sources as opposed to widespread food sources. If you can find those little honey holes, if you will, and really be super careful with the wind, be very disciplined about how you go in there and get out of them and hunt them lightly, but give yourself a chance on the periphery of that deer's travel pattern to get a crack at him if he makes a little bit of a slip up one afternoon or one morning. But, day in, day out, you're just going to have to be very disciplined in how you approach it because, again, it only takes one slip up on our part, and the buck is totally educated to at least that particular hunting setup. Now, he might continue to roam wildly across the area and get shot by somebody else, but his knowledge of that one particular ambush site that you've set up we want to minimize that, and whether it's, because we've hunted it sloppily, we went in there wrong wind, or we threw trash on the ground, or we went in bad conditions, and we basically left a lot of telltale knowledge for him to pick up by our presence. Even if he didn't come by the stand when we were in it, he still knows we were there. And what we got to just continue to go back to is minimizing the possibility of that. But I do think that the guys that are most successful most often are really just crowding in as far as they dare on the downwind side of a travel pattern that they have reason to know is there, either because of sightings, sign, or more often anymore, it's just simply trail camera images that tell them that they're on the right pattern. But you still have to be careful about how you hunt it.
Yeah. And speaking of that whole topic of, just being particularly careful about everything related to hunting pressure, you might remember I actually wrote an article for North American Whitetail a few years ago about how I personally have decided to minimize almost completely the number of mornings that I hunt during, early to mid-October. And it's a long-running discussion that me and Dan here have between ourselves and other guests and stuff. And I guess I'm just curious about your take on that. What's your perspective on morning hunts in early to mid-October?
Well, I have shot some bucks in the morning in, let's say, the third week of October, 20th, 25th, somewhere in there, where, of course, the later you get in October, generally speaking, the better things are going to get. I've had a little bit of luck on some early bucks starting to cruise small isolated food plots, and sometimes even coming into a buck decoy. And I've had pretty good luck doing that. I do feel like that kind of minimizes my disturbance of any real security cover, because I'm out there on the edge of an opening, and I can hunt that way. And if he comes out and he sees a decoy and he's responsive to it, then he comes around, gives me a shot, he's the right buck, then I'm golden. If it doesn't happen, I've at least not disturbed any significant security cover in the process. I can back out, take my decoy, and go home. So I have seen, sometimes you tend to think, I've got to be back in the deepest, darkest swamp to kill one, during this lull period. Maybe not, but you do need a little bit of weather or something to get that buck a little bit more interested in what's about to come in November. And if you get that set of conditions, I do think that's a great time to get a shot at some relatively mature buck.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver, off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Okay, next we're going to get a very different set of ideas from Dan Infalt. You know him from The Hunting Beast. You know him as an aggressive public land and DIY bow hunter. Here are some ideas from Dan. I want to take a step back here real quick to get started. because, this time frame, this middle portion of October, lots of people refer to that as the October lull. So me and Dallas were just talking about this, our different opinions on this, but I want to hear from you, Dan. Is the October lull, is that fact or fiction?
I would say it's somewhat fact. Somewhere in the middle there. I mean, you do get less movement in daylight during this time frame. I think it's starting to pick up now, but during that early October frame, I think that you do get less movement. But I don't see a lull because I'm pushing those bedding areas. I'm still getting them, in daylight, seeing them. But I'm definitely seeing them closer to the edge of darkness. And a lot of the bucks I am seeing that are good bucks during that time frame are only getting 75, 100 yards from those beds. So I think where most people are seeing a lull is they're sitting over food plots or food sources, or acorn patches or stuff like that, and they're seeing less movement in daylight. I'm still seeing the same amount of movement at that time frame. I'm just seeing it later in the day.
Okay. And what do you think is causing that decline in deer activity that most people are seeing? You said that these deer are staying closer to their bedding areas later. I've got some different ideas, and there's been a number of different hypotheses thrown around there about what caused that later movement or less decreased movement. But what do you think is causing that, Dan?
For me, it would have to be a guess. I think some of it has to do with the heat and the fact that they're changing their coats to winter coats, because it almost seems like when that cold hits, that period of time in the evening when it gets cold is when they get up and move. But that's pure speculation on my part.
Okay. And I imagine maybe some hunting pressure might cause that too from a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so. But, I hunt some spots that don't get much pressure, and I still see it. And I hunt places with pressure, and I see it. So,
okay, interesting. So then, that being the case, this time frame, you said that you're still seeing that activity because you're pushing it close to beds and close to bedding areas. And I think, that is, I'm sure, something I want to talk about here. And are there any other major tactics other than that you're employing this time of year to get close to those deer, or does your entire strategy revolve around those bedding areas at this time?
I would never say my entire strategy revolves around any one thing. But there's one tip I'd like to give your listeners that they probably haven't heard before.
Okay.
And this is going to sound a little weird to you, but I guarantee it's true. Right around the first week of October to the second week, maple leaves, when they first start turning orange and dropping, when they just first start dropping, they have a bigger draw than acorns. But you have to have isolated maple leaves. Them things hit them like you wouldn't believe. I think they get a sweetness or something when they first die, when they start dropping. But they're a huge draw. I first learned that from Andre D'Acquisto. He told me that when we were on a hunt one time, and I really paid attention after that, and he was dead on. I've observed it many times and moving to these little maple patches.
Wow, that's definitely something I never thought about.
I got a maple tree in my backyard. Maybe I should hunt in my backyard tonight.
How close is the bedding?
Probably a couple miles.
So that said, then let's cycle back to the bedding area topic, because I think there's a whole lot we could talk about in this, and we talked a little bit about it back in March or April, whenever we chatted with you the first time, Dan. But I guess let's start at the highest level and then just keep on diving deeper. Can you give us a high-level overview of what you're doing when it comes to hunting these bedding areas? When you're heading in for a hunt, what are you thinking about? Why are you doing it? And how are you setting up?
Well, there's two different ways I go in on these bedding areas. And the best way is if I've pre-scouted it and I've gone in and, say, January, February, and really taken a good look at this bedding area and looked at how the deer stage and looked from their perspective at how to set up. That's the best scenario. Because then when I go back and I go in for the first time and hunt, I've got a really good shot at killing them. The second scenario is I haven't hunted the area, and like this last buck, I'm going in and I'm guessing on the bedding. I think I do a little better than other people on that aspect because I've been looking at these beds for so many years that I have a good knack of reading them, if you know what I mean. But those are my two main scenarios, is guessing the bedding or knowing it from previous scouting.
Okay. And so how about let's talk about that first scenario, and then I really want to dive into that second scenario too, because that might apply to people at this point who maybe are just trying to figure this out as they go. But for someone who already has these bedding areas scouted out, let's say like you already have a whole lot of different bedding areas across numerous properties that you plan on hunting, how do you have those prepared? Do you have stands hung up? Or I think from what I remember, lots of times you're setting up on the go. But can you talk to us about how you are choosing which ones you're going to hunt on a given day, and then when you're heading in, and what do those setups look like?
Okay, well, some of the bedding areas are based on acorns, or corn or some food source. And if you know that food source and know when that food source is available, you know when to hunt it. Some, I don't have any idea why they're bedding there, except for that it's a good bedding area. And I got to kind of, go in and check it out and maybe give it a hunt in September, maybe a hunt later in October, maybe a rut hunt, and try and figure out when they're there.
Are you using wind direction at all to help make that decision? Is that from what?
Absolutely. But there's one thing about wind is it's more important on the hill country direction-wise than it is in swamps. A lot of times in swamps they bed on these points and fingers and little patches, not based on the wind at all. So you can have the wind in your face and really do well. But in like hill country, they bed on that leeward side on the points and such. So you got to play that wind a little bit. You got to play that off wind if you're going to get them on the uphill side, which is a lot better than hunting downhill because then you get the thermals busting you. So yeah, wind plays a huge direction. Wind plays a huge factor in choosing where you're going to hunt and why, and more so than just keeping your wind from getting to the buck. In a lot of cases, they bed in a certain position because of the wind.
Can you tell us a little more about that last part there? Why they bed in a certain area? There's a lot of different opinions on this. Bucks will enter a bedding area with the wind in their face, or they'll bed with the wind over their backs, or they'll only leave with the wind in their face. What's your take on that, on how deer use the wind when choosing where to bed and how to leave their bed and approach the bed in the first place?
That's a good question, and one I hear a lot. And as you can imagine, I've observed a lot of deer going in and out of beds. And the overall majority of them come into a bed by circling around and J-hooking and smelling from downwind. They just don't feel comfortable going in there for some reason without the wind in their face. So it makes it kind of difficult to hunt those bedding areas in the morning because they kind of come in from a different direction each time. So those trails you see at the bedding areas are usually the deer leaving the beds, not going into them, because they come in kind of weird. But when they leave those beds, I don't see any relation to the wind whatsoever. What I do see is if the wind is not in their favor, if it's to their back, they come out a little more cautiously and a little slower, but they still go the direction they want to go.
So then when you're choosing where to set up, you're not thinking about where will a buck want to go in the evening. You're hunting in the evening, so you're not thinking about where's he going to want to go based on the wind. You're just thinking about this morning, what was the wind direction that would cause him to move into this bedding area. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true to a degree. I mean, like I said, a lot of the swamp bedding is regardless of the wind.
Yeah.
But if it is a wind-specific bed, yeah, I'm certainly thinking about, if he's bedded there in the morning. However, I've seen bucks get up and move when the wind changes during the day. So that can have a bearing on it too. So you might want to be set up on where the wind is now or where it's going to be in the evening.
Okay.
I got a question for you. You mentioned earlier that you're not hunting mornings this time of year. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Why you're not spending time in the stand in the mornings?
Well, as you can imagine, I've been hunting these beds like this for many, many, many years. What I've found is when I go into these bedding areas in the morning, kicking the bucks out of the bedding areas before daylight. They're already bedded. What I see during daylight in the mornings at this time of the year is usually immature bucks or does. The mature ones are already bedded.
Okay. All right. Now, is that the same for your marsh and your hill country?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. See, now me on the other hand, I love hunting mornings, and but like unlike you, I'm not a huge bed hunter, right? I like hunting transitions between food and bedding in the mornings, and that's where I had my success this weekend anyway. Although I didn't kill, I still had an encounter with a pretty good deer.
And we've talked about this a lot, Dallas, and I think maybe again, I probably already mentioned this on previous episodes, but I continue to wonder if this is, again, because of the differences in pressure between, what Dan might be hunting and what I might be hunting in Michigan or Wisconsin versus, the properties that you're there on Iowa. I don't know. I
got a comment on this. A friend of mine, Andre D'Acquisto, has shot in a lot of big bucks. Matter of fact, if you put him in the books, he has more Boone and Crockett's with a bow than anybody in the world. And I noticed that he's killing a lot of those big bucks in the mornings. He loves hunting mornings. And I was interviewing him for something I was doing. And I said, I got to ask you, how do you keep killing these bucks in the morning? And I told him the problem I had, that I'm kicking them out of their beds and stuff. And he said to me, he says, Dan, I got the same issue. But look at the dates when I killed those deer. He says, I'm waiting for the moon to be overhead before I go in there. He says, and when I have a moon overhead in the morning, within the first hour of daylight, he says, those bucks get back to those beds at gray light, and I'm able to shoot them in daylight.
I'm really glad you brought this up, Dan.
So they're coming back to the beds later than they normally would?
With the moon overhead, yeah.
Okay.
Or underfoot.
Okay.
So can you...
He seems to think that the overhead moon has a little more influence than the underfoot one. But I'm not so sure.
Can you go into this a little more for people that might not be as familiar with underfoot, overhead, or all these different moon time frames? I know you published something on your website, these moon dates that tend to lead to earlier movement in the evening or later movement in the morning. Could you just explain that in detail for us? Because the whole moon thing is something that so many people have questions about and so many people don't really understand. So can you give us your whole kind of 101 on that piece?
Okay. I don't understand why they do it, but I have seen plenty of evidence that I know that it goes on. And there's more movement when the moon is straight up or straight down. There's more movement with buck movement. And when that happens in the last couple hours of daylight or the first couple hours of daylight, you get more buck movement or more deer movement overall. It's hard to notice on the public lands I hunt. But the few times I was over by Andre's hunting managed land, you could set your watch to what time the food plots would fill up based on the moon chart, and it was amazing to just sit back and watch that. Where I got my information from is Jeff Murray. He passed away a few years ago, but his family still puts out a chart. I think the chart's like $5 or $10. They sell it on his website, which if you just search Jeff Murray Moon Guide, you'll find it. I don't believe all of his principles about where to hunt and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm pushing bedding areas, and he's talking about when they're in food sources and stuff based on the moon. My thing is the movement based on the moon overhead or underfoot.
And so this chart, what is this chart showing? Is it showing you? It's just telling you the times.
It shows you the time frames that the moon is overhead and underfoot, the dates, and it gives you. He has like a hot thing on there for time frame, but I think you can get that information free too. You can just search it online, and there's different charts different people have out there, but some other people have different ideas on moon charts and moon positioning and stuff too. So you can get kind of confused if you start searching it in other sources. And
you've put some of that on the Hunting Beast, right? If I found that, could I link to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's stickied up on the top of the deer hunting forum. I put down the dates and times that I feel are the best for daylight movement.
Okay.
I also put down, based on the moon, when the rut cruise time should be.
Okay. Interesting. And so, again, based on these charts and the rising and setting of the moon, this is, if you see one of these charts or one of these time periods falling within that same time period of first light or last light, those are times when you might get that earlier or later movement. And so that might be a time, even in the middle of October, to push into one of these, push in closer to a bedding area or one of these hotter spots, because you might just get a couple extra minutes of movement, right?
Correct. And really, I mean, if you can get 10 extra minutes of movement, they can get a long ways in 10 minutes.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely. So now how about our second scenario that you mentioned a while back, Dan, which was if you haven't pre-scouted an area, let's say there's a guy listening to the show right now, and he's thinking to himself, okay, I'm having horrible success right now. I've been hunting field edges and I'm not seeing any bucks, but I hear Dan is telling me to try to push closer to some of these bedding areas. For that guy that hasn't done the preseason scouting, all he has is, what he knows about his property and some maps. How can he go about finding these bedding areas and then, making those moves? How are you doing that, and what should he know, this other guy?
Okay, that's real terrain specific, but say it's a marsh, a cattail marsh. To me, that's the easiest thing to read because you can see it visually so easy. If you looked at a cattail marsh and you look at the timber edge where it meets the cattails, you got this straight edge of trees meeting cattails. And somewhere along that line, you're going to see like a finger of trees go out, or a point. Right at the point, the tip of that finger, I guarantee you there's going to be a good buck bed. And you see these little islands that got little brushy points that come off them. Guarantee you at the tip of that, there'll be a buck bed. And when you look at a swamp and you start filling that whole thing with timber, you're going to see the same stuff. It's just harder to visualize. Because you're going to be able to see the different colors and the different types of trees. The hardwoods look different than the tamaracks and such, right? And it's going to be the same thing. You're looking at those island tips. You're looking at those changes in the contour, that straight line along a hard transition of thick meets, open. And when you start hunting the public land, you've got to start looking for the remoter transitions so that you're not sitting there hunting where everybody else is hunting, because people will follow those transitions too, like a trail. So you got to try to find the remote ones that people don't go to. Now, if you get into hilly terrain, then you're looking for points and fingers and stuff like that.
Okay.
And you're using a topo.
So I've got my topo, and I've found a finger coming off a ridge, or maybe if I'm in a marshy area, I've found that finger of timber or of high ground that pushes into the swamp. Am I just going to find that spot on the map, decide, okay, I know that there's a hot food source on the other side of this, so there's a decent chance he might be bedding out in that finger. I'm going to try to get as close as I can and set up on any random day, or maybe on one of those moon days? Or is there anything else that he needs to be thinking about before moving in to try to hunt that bed he thinks is there?
Well, what I do is, if I'm pretty sure there's going to be a bed there, or I think there's going to be a bed, I just hunt it. If I can get within 100 yards, I'm sure I can get a chance at that buck in daylight. If there's a spot where I can't get that close to that buck, can't get close enough to that bed, I got to hang back like 200 yards or so, that's the spot I save for that moon day, or that cold front that comes in that gets them to move a little earlier. Those are the days I save for that. Otherwise, I'm hunting those spots one after another, pushing as close as I can. Because hunting this way, you're not going to see bucks every time. They got different bedding areas. They're all over the place. And what I'm doing is I'm trying each bedding area. And once your scent's in there, they're going to stay out of there for a while. So it makes the other bedding areas better. So you just keep, hopping around and hitting these things. And you're going to have a few that don't pay off. And the more of an amateur you are at it, the more you're going to have some that don't pay off. And you just got to keep hitting it until it works. And the hardest part for a guy who doesn't hunt like this is keeping up his confidence level. Because, like I said, even I'll go 5-6 hunts without seeing a deer. But I guarantee you, in the long run, I'm seeing more big bucks than most guys.
All right, now we're going to bounce over to Bernie Barringer. He's the author of The Freelance Bow Hunter, written for many different magazines, and he's got some different ideas on October. Can you share with us what your progression looks like throughout the month of October, and how your hunting strategy is typically changing as we progress?
Yeah. It's interesting how so many people really think the month of October is just a time to just wait, forget it. Let's just wait for November. And, the first week in October can be a really tough time because the bachelor groups are broken up, and, the patterns, we're having a hard time figuring out where the deer are because, throughout the month of September, these deer are sort of just changing in their food sources and their patterns. And, you'll be watching on your cameras and you'll see these deer in the fields in the evenings and stuff like that, starting in late August and right through the middle of September. And all of a sudden they're gone, and then, the end of September, 1st of October, all of a sudden you've got a buck on your camera and you go, I haven't seen, where'd this come from? Well, he came from somebody else, they're wondering where he is. And, so the first week in October, it's pretty much all about the food. If you can find acorns, hazelnuts, stuff like that in my area, that's kind of what they're eating on. If there's still some corn in the field, they're still in somewhat of a pattern. It's just that you'll have to find these deer again, and you have to move quickly because the patterns are changing. I like hunting October because the first week in October, especially, the weather's nice, and usually here we've had a frost, so we don't have much about mosquitoes and stuff like that. But then as the second week of October wears on, then it's getting colder, so the deer are seeking out the high carb foods like corn and stuff like that. If there's standing corns left, that's a real magnet for them. Sometimes they're picking up corn that's been harvested and so forth, and so that second week is not a bad time to hunt either. And by the third week in October, now you're starting to see a lot of scrapes and rubs that are pretty active, rather than you start seeing scrapes and rubs at the end of August and even as the velvet comes off. But by the third week in October, the bucks are really paying attention to them, and so that's when I start paying attention to them too. And also that's when the effectiveness of calling and rattling is starting to work. And then by the fourth week in October, then calling and rattling is at its peak. It's the best. Last week in October, first week in November, I would even give the edge to the last week in October for calling and rattling. That's the best time of the year also to hunt scrapes and rubs because the bucks are visiting them consistently. And another issue with scrapes that a lot of people don't think about, and it's kind of complicated, but there's been several studies done that bucks don't visit scrapes in the daylight. You've probably read these signs. Mm-hmm. What they do is they put a camera at the scrape, and then they say, well, we got 80% of the pictures of mature bucks that we got were at night.
Yeah.
And one thing that they're not noticing about this is the fact that they're only putting a camera right at the scrape, and so bucks are checking scrapes during the day at this time, but they're just not walking right into them, because most of your scrapes, if you think about it, they're on a power line cutter, a road, 2-track on the edge of a field or something like that. And these mature bucks don't like to expose themselves to open areas during the daylight. So whenever they can, they'll stay 30, 40 yards downwind of the scrape in cover, and they'll just check the scrape without walking right up to it. Now, if there's something good in the scrape, if there's fresh doe pea, or if you use a good lure or something like that, you can hunt right over these scrapes and bring these bucks right in. But so don't completely discount hunting scrapes during the daylight, because there's that last week in October. In fact, Halloween's kind of famous for killing bucks over sign.
So at that time period, do you prioritize scrapes so much that during that last week of October, that's one of the main areas that you're actually hunting over, is specifically in a spot because of a scrape?
Yeah, I'm looking for areas that are all torn up. And I'm by the last week in October, I'm not spending a lot of time worrying about beds and food and stuff like that. I'm looking for sign that those bucks, the testosterone's rising. They're going to be checking those scrapes and if you find an area that's got 6 or 8 scrapes and a bunch of rubs and stuff like that, it's definitely worth spending the afternoon there during that last week in October.
So one of the things that I feel like a lot of people do talk about when we're on this topic of scrapes is that the places that you will see that daytime activity are usually going to be the scrapes. Some people refer to like primary scrape areas or something like that, being these places back in the cover. So the scrapes that are on the field edge, don't focus on those. Try to find these areas that are all tore up, but the ones that are back secluded somewhat. Is that the way you're looking at things too, or are you even taking advantage of field edge scrapes because you still think that they're coming downwind of it 30 or 40 yards into the cover, checking on those field edge scrapes some way?
Yeah, if the wind is right, that you can get downwind of one of those scrapes that's on a field edge, they're good places to hunt. You know, if you can have the wind blowing from you or from the scrape to you and getting a tree up there, the bucks they'll check them, and then they'll make a hook. They'll kind of circle around in a half circle. If they smell something they like, then they'll kind of circle around and try to quarter into the wind with kind of the wind on the flat of their face, so it's in one nostril basically, and they'll approach the scrapes that way. So to keep that in mind. But I would say if I had to choose between the two, I'd take an area back in the cover more that's closer to the bedding area that's all torn up, because you're more likely to encounter them in the daylight if you're closer to the bedding area. But these areas where they're all tore up on the edge of the fields, they shouldn't be completely overlooked.
All right, fair enough.
Have you seen, from all your years of being in a tree stand and just watching deer movement in general, is there a time where, we're talking about hunting scrapes right now, where these deer really start to get up on their feet in daylight, whether that's getting up early or coming back to bed late?
I would say the last week in October here in the upper Midwest is when you start seeing that. And then by, the first week in November, then you start seeing more of the chasing more so, and so then the scrapes will work, but you can concentrate more on the doe bedding areas and where the does are feeding in the evening, because the bucks are going to be, does are starting to smell pretty good, around the 1st of November. So those bucks are going to be sniffing them out. To answer your question, the last week in October, absolutely.
Dan, were you asking about like time of year, or were you asking more like other factors that change it?
Well, not necessarily factors. I mean, in regards to hunting the actual scrapes, right? That's something that I don't do a lot of. So just because for me, I'm not seeing a lot of enough movement during the daylight. I'm not necessarily going right into the bedroom in late October. Maybe if there is a I guess a cold front coming for an evening hunt, I guess. But I do like hunting late October, the morning hunt back in a bedroom where the deer might be coming later back to that bedroom, or maybe scent checking. So I guess my question was, what time of year, whether it's like the 24th, 28th, 29th, are you typically seeing these deer not chasing yet, but getting up on their feet a little earlier because, there's that smell in the air, like, hey, we got to start getting ready.
Gotcha. I think Bernie, you would
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think your previous answer then answers that, right? That last week in October.
Yeah. And I would like to mention the mornings too, though. That's I would say the closer you get to November, the better it gets. But as far as the morning goes, when they're primarily on a feeding to bedding pattern, then they'll trickle back in. And it's hard to hunt mornings on feeding to bedding patterns without bumping deer, particularly if they're hunting in open fields. And, they'll start trickling back in well before daylight sometimes. And you might not encounter the deer, and it's hard not to spook them or, intrude. But the closer you get to November 1st, the more the bucks stay out a little later. So that's kind of an answer to your question, that the effectiveness of morning hunting gets better as you approach the 1st of November.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition. of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
All right, moving on. Here is a few bits from Jeff Sturgis. He's the founder of Whitetail Habitat Solutions, the author of a number of great books. He's got the Whitetail Habitat Solutions YouTube channel and a lot of interesting ideas, in particular about how he looks at weather during the month of October. And we're going to drop into a section here where Jeff and I were talking. It was right around October 20th, 21st, somewhere in that ballpark, and I asked him to walk through the upcoming forecast. This is back in 2015, I think. I want him to walk through the upcoming forecast and how that would impact how he hunts. So keep this in mind. He's talking through a hypothetical set of weather factors for the last 10 days or so of October and how that would influence his strategy. So here we go. So
yes, definitely.
So then here's the next thing I'm curious about, because, right, I think we hear about this type of thing, paying attention to cold fronts, looking for those changes in wind speed. Like, it seems like you like when it calms down a little bit, and the high pressure days. We hear about a lot of these things, but sometimes it's hard to understand how to actually take that and put it into play. So something I've seen you do the last couple of weeks is you're putting out this weekly forecast where you talk about what the weather is going to look like in the coming week or 2 weeks, and then which of those days coming up are high value sits and what that means for you as a hunter. Could you possibly walk us through, as best as you can remember right now, what that looks like for the coming days here, as kind of an example? And for context, this podcast will be going live on this Thursday. So maybe if you remember what the forecast looks, could you talk to us about what you're looking at with this upcoming weather and how you implement some of the things that we've just talked about?
Yes, yeah, and I have that weather forecast burned in my head pretty well. But this time when I pulled up for La Crosse, Wisconsin, last time I pulled up Chicago, I was actually thinking about flipping over to the Detroit area or Lansing or Ann Arbor next week.
But
regardless, so that'll be coming your way anyway.
Perfect.
But the big thing with this week is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We had 3 days in the low 70s to mid 70s, at least around here in this area. And really, across the same general line, moving east and west, there's not that much difference. There's going to be a lag time of about a day, I would say, from here in lower Michigan, and then another day over to northern Pennsylvania and New York. But really, things happening, for the most part, the weather's moving west to east or west to northeast. So that being said, this week we had those 3 warmer days, and then here we have about a 10-degree drop on Thursday. And so those 3 warm days, to me, really helped set up that Thursday drop. And you could say, if it was 4 or 5 days of poor weather or warm weather, if it was if you had a monster storm moving through on Wednesday, that might make a really big difference, but still a high quality day. And especially that's going to be the 22nd of October. And that happens to be the date that I've shot a couple really nice bucks, 5 and 6 year old bucks. Had a really nice opportunity on another. Got a nice buck on the 20th, on the 27th, another 5, 6 year old. So we're starting to get into that time where I'm really getting pumped. I think I talked to you about that this week too, Mark. It's a big bucks on cam and on the cameras, and it's getting exciting. Then on Friday, what's really cool is so Thursday showing let's say a low of 39 and a high of 60. Let's say on Wednesday it was a high of 71, so there's 11-degree temperature drop. I believe the morning temperature. Now, when you look at a weather forecast, and maybe some of the listeners don't realize this, but when you see the low for Thursday, that's actually Friday morning's temperature, and so it's a little deceiving because if you look at Wednesday, the low was 49. That's actually Thursday morning. So Friday morning has a forecasted low of actually 39, and so 10-degree temperature drop from morning to morning. I'm looking for that from daytime highs to daytime high. And in some areas, they're actually calling for a little bit of rain or precipitation, maybe some higher winds on Wednesday to Thursday. Even looking into Chicago, I think the high-quality days are Friday there, where that will help to actually enhance the value of that day. And going forward, I think there's a little bit of moisture on that Friday, Saturday time, and then another little bit of drop on Sunday. And so I'm looking at, like, if I was planning out this week, I'd really want to make a priority of hunting this Thursday, Friday, because of the first couple days after the front. There's good quality temperature drops, a little bit of weather to serve to set that up, and then there's a little bit of a bump where you have a little bit of a warmer day, some inclement weather, rain, and then clearing and high pressure on Sunday. So if I'm planning my sits, I might spend Saturday with family. It looks like Friday night's going to be pretty wet. Not to say that you couldn't shoot a mature buck in the rain, certainly, but if I'm planning my sits and I have 4 or 5 that I really want to get out, I'm actually planning Friday or Thursday morning, Thursday night, Friday morning, and then I'll sit on Sunday as well. So, and then looking ahead, and this is looking out a week and a half. There's a really nice drop. I think it's next Saturday or Sunday, where you have pretty steady weather, it looks like, next week, and then a major drop around Halloween. So it's still a little ways out. The window of error is probably, really high, probably, 10%, 15% accuracy rating. But at the same time, I'm really looking forward to that next drop right around Halloween, which is prime time in the northern part of the Midwest.
Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be a great time to be in the tree. Now, looking though at this most kind of upcoming weekend. So you talked about that cold front hitting today. The day that this podcast is going live is Thursday. So that cold front's hitting Thursday. You said Thursday, Friday could be good sits, and then maybe again Sunday. This time of year, the 24th, 25th, 26th, give or take, around this part of the year in October, how are you approaching those hunts at this time to take advantage of these good conditions? Where are you hunting? What are you thinking about when choosing those stand sites?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm looking at total pre-rut hunting. And what I mean by that is really the bucks, to me, are not moving that far. And I have to excuse me if this is a poor example or a crash example, but, it'd be like there's 30 girls in a nightclub, bar, or whatever, and there's 10 guys going in, and that's a time where it's, pretty easy to meet a girl. And that's, to me,
unless you're Dan, he struggles.
That's funny you say that, because I used the same analogy a while ago.
That's funny. Yeah, I used that with a client, and he said, I don't see anything wrong with that example. But anyways, it's kind of like that for the pre-rut. These big boys already have their fall range established. They have where they want to eat, where they want to stay during the day, their bedding areas, and they have some does nearby. And it's not that they have to have those does, just the way it works. The does are right next to that high-quality food, good cover, and then those bucks aren't far behind them. And so they're already established, and when one of those does starts to get a little ruddy, then it's those bucks, they can pick up on that. There's a lot of does that'll start coming into heat, and those first few does are pretty easy for them to find, and they don't really need to move around too much. And so at the same time, right before that happens, they're going to become more active. And I know just in the last 3 days, I've had a lot of scrapes pop up in and around the properties where I hunt, and that's not even going in the woods much. That's just on the exterior edges. So what I'm looking at is, for one, those bucks aren't going to move a long ways, so I'm not going to sit all day. I just don't think there's a lot of value in sitting there in the middle of the day unless you have to get into an area that you can't get out until after dark. So I'm placing a high priority in the morning near bedding areas. So I'm trying to get within 100 to 150 yards of a mature buck's bedding area, knowing that his range might expand from an acre to 10 to 15 acres during the morning, especially when there's cooler temperatures. At the same time in the evening, if I sit in that bedding area, then it's going to be a pretty poor hunt the closer it gets to dark, because that buck is then turning his attention towards the evening food sources, the social areas where all the does and the doe family groups are moving in, the other bucks, and he wants to leave that bedding area and go to that food source. So if I'm still in that bedding area, then the closer it gets to dark, the less chance that I have seen a buck. So I find it best to prioritize my sits and increase that value by sitting in a morning area that relates to a bedding area, and then an evening area that relates to a food source. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm sitting in the bedding area or in the food source, but I'm pretty close.
So
that's more the pre-rut.
So how are you choosing? Okay, again, we're talking about how we're prioritizing, different days. We've prioritized days, but then how do you prioritize a certain bedding area or a certain food source? Because I'm sure, you're looking at your farm and you have done something to know, okay, I think there's bedding here, I think there's food here. But then the next question that naturally people are thinking through is, okay, I know I want to be by a bedding area in the morning, or I know I want to be by a good food source. Then they start saying, okay, which one? And so I think we've talked about trail cameras, we talk about scouting, we talk about sightings. What of all those, if any, or anything else, are you using to then choose the specific food source you're hunting in the evening?
Well, I do love my trail cameras. And for one, it shows me if there's mature bucks on the property or not. It shows me when they come on the property, when they don't. It shows me if they're coming during the day or at night. But at the same time, the direction they're coming from should give me some clue as to what bedding area they're choosing to stay at during the day. And so if I knew that a monster buck was hanging back out in this corner in a bedding area, then that would be my priority stand location, where I'd want to go back into the edge of that bedding area, walk in the opposite direction from the food. So in the morning when I'm walking in the dark, I'm not going through the food source. I'm coming in from the exact opposite way, thinking that that buck is somewhere between that food and his bedding. He might already be in his bedding, but this time of year there's a lot of social activity taking place in the morning. They're making rubs, scrapes, chasing does. And so I have a lot more of a likelihood of sneaking into the backside of a bedding area, waiting for a buck to come back to me at this time of the year than I do October 10th, for example, or maybe even October 15th. And so what I'm also doing is there's some pretty good value sit in the evening too. And so I'm looking at, if I'm gonna sit 3 times and I'm gonna say hunt 2 mornings and 1 evening, where can I sit in the morning that I'm not potentially ruining that evening sit if I happen to bump a deer, and vice versa? So I'm really thinking about my next 2 to 3 sits out and making sure that deer are moving from point A to point B, and then they're also moving from point C to point B, and I'm not getting into both those lines or one of those lines and destroying for that evening hunt. I'm saving another line of movement for the next morning or the next evening, and I'm trying to prioritize my sits that way so that I can maintain a high value and a fresh stand with each sit. I also, in each area, most of my really high quality areas I love to really focus on, I'll usually have 2 to 3 complementary stands. And so one area I can think of in particular, I just can't wait to hunt this weekend. It'll be the first set. It's a triangle of stands. The one I can hunt with southerly winds in the evening. The other one I can hunt with northerly winds all day, either morning or evening. And the other one has to be southwesterly winds to westerly winds in the morning. And so it gives me a great complement of stands. I can hunt just about any wind condition, morning, evening, midday. It doesn't really matter. If I know there's a big buck up there, which there always is, then I can go into one of those stands and get a high quality sit. But after I sit in there that one time, I'll probably skip over and hunt another set, for the next sit or the following morning.
So are you ever looking at an area, in a particular stand, and in setting a morning and an evening, or an evening and a morning, to try to catch movement coming back and forth if in fact the wind is the same?
Yeah, and there's a lot of times where when we're out in the hill country, you can cheat the wind a lot, which is different than the flatland. I mean, I lived in Michigan for 42 years, so it's pretty flat there compared to, out here. But that being said, if you can get away with hunting both those mornings, there's times where, let's say the total movement from where I think a buck bedding is to where I think he's really generally spending his evening and nighttime hours, let's say it's 400 yards long, that movement, or 300 yards. Well, I might come in the opposite direction, get a good morning hunt, and then leave that same way. And then I'll flip around in the afternoon for a nice 3 to 4 hour sit, actually walk in through the food source and get into my stand location and let my wind blow into a safe way. And so in that way, I'm hunting both ends of the movement. And if I feel that I got in non-invasively in the morning, I didn't hear any spooks, I didn't hear anything blowing at me while I was on stand, and I thought I got away with a good clean sit, I will certainly try that at times too.
Are all your stands pre-hung then, or do you set up a lot of stands throughout the year?
Yeah, most of my stands are pre-hung. Now, when we go down to Ohio and hunt on public land, we have a few that we set a couple weeks ago, but at the same time, we have a lot of trees that we've marked for climbers. And I do use climbers occasionally around here. I like actually the comfort of a climber. I like the portability. I do not like the noise walking in with it. Up here it already takes me 50 minutes to get to some of my stands walking up 400 feet in elevation. So to put a climber on my back along with the extra weight I have on my front, then it gets me pretty tired out by the time I'm up there. So I try to have those pre-hung stands cleaned out and ready to go, and then I'll use a climber when I need that flexibility.
You mentioned that when you're setting up for those morning sits at this time of year, you like to be, I think you'd said, like 100 to 150 yards from where you think that bedding area is, trying to be kind of close into there. On the flip side, in the evening, are you relating more to, I know you mentioned that you're relating more to the food source, but I'm just curious about the relativity of being near that food source. Are you hunting right on the food, or do you like to still usually try to stay pretty far off it? I know from some of the stuff I've read from you've talked a lot about the lines of movement and placing yourself on that, but I'd love to hear a little more about that and and if that factors into your distance from food or distance from the prime food, things like that.
Well, one of the things, I'm kind of looking at absolutes too, and one of those things is that absolute is where's the staging area. So staging area to me is a really thick area, brushy area, high stem count density of regeneration, conifers, grasses, briars, kind of that mix where that last step of safety that a deer will go through from its secure bedding, secure travel corridor, gets to that edge in that staging area, and when it pops out of there, it's really heading towards food. And so a lot of times, because of the stem density and the proximity to food, those areas also become doe family group bedding areas. And so what I'm trying to do is really protect that. So I'm thinking of a spot that I hunted in the evening. It was in 2011. Shot a real nice 5-6-year-old buck, beautiful buck on October 22nd. And I was able to position myself. There was bedding areas on benches down below the flat that I was on. And then there was a staging area that was probably about 70 to 80 yards from where my stand location was. And so if you can kind of imagine, I'm coming into this stand location. To my left and approximately within 75 to 150 yards, there's high-quality bedding. To my right, about 70 to 80 yards, there's a staging area with a high likelihood that there were some doe family groups bedding. And then about 30 yards out in the grass from there was the start of one of our food plots. That was that food plot, the deer could go in either direction for 550 yards one way or 400 yards in the other. And what I like about not having a big circular food plot at that point is once a deer entered that food source in the evening, it really stretched them out. So more deer would move, more deer. Those deer are pulled out in the middle of fields, away from the field edge, and that to me helps more deer cycle through too. So in that case, I actually shot that buck with maybe 45 minutes to go before dark as he was cruising between that staging area and the bedding area. And it was kind of a dead area, almost a secure travel, but more of a travel corridor on benches and funnels than actually coming into, I was basically coming in between doe bedding and buck bedding on a more of an open flat, and the doe bedding being the staging area.
Okay, and coming up here is Adam Hayes. He has been on a number of TV shows, including Team 200, which has been his latest. He's killed a whole lot of impressive deer, including, uniquely compared to a lot of people, 4 different bucks over 200 inches. And he does this in a very targeted, specific, strategic way, which makes his input very interesting. Here's some quick ideas from Adam on hunting October. You talked about the success that you have towards the end of October, partly in that period of time that people call the October lull. And from some of the things I've read, you've certainly killed some of your giant bucks during that time frame. And I understand that, what we've been talking about, the moon and understanding to be patient and waiting to push in until those conditions are right. I know that's a big part of your kind of formula for success, but what else are you doing at that time of year? What are the other pieces of that puzzle in late October that are helping you have success? Because people struggle with that sometimes.
Yeah, well, it goes back to really seeing the big picture and understanding what's going on that time of the year. If you're after a specific animal and you want your best opportunity to kill that animal, you need to concentrate on when that animal is going to be the most predictable and the most patternable, and that's early season. Before you've got into the rut, when he's chasing all over the place, late season, they've been pressured for 3 or 4 months and they're on edge. Every little thing they hear and smell and see. Early season is, I think, it's your best chance to kill a specific animal. And, a lot of people talk about the October lull and how tough it is to hunt. Yeah, it is in a sense, but, I learned this from Andre, is that those animals are doing the exact same thing pretty much every day. All they're doing is they're bedding and they're feeding, and they're going from A to B. And they're doing it in a very, very small area. They're not traveling very far at all. They're very vulnerable because they're so predictable and patternable because they're doing the same thing every day. But they're very tough to kill because they're doing it in a very small area, and you're normally only going to get one chance to invade that little area before game's over, and it completely changes his pattern. He goes nocturnal. He goes to the next farm over. I don't believe they run out of the county, but they will definitely change their pattern. So you're only going to get one crack at them early. So that's when the late season scouting comes into play. That's when, knowing what these animals are doing, where they're at, where they're bedding, where they're feeding, how they're getting back and forth from A to B, knowing where the weak spot's at, where you need to be to kill them, having things set up, knowing what winds you need to get into that spot to kill them, maybe having some strategically placed trail cameras along that pattern so you know when that animal is moving during daylight. And like I said, it's a tough time to hunt, but if you really understand what's going on, it's your best chance to kill a big mature buck because he's doing the exact same thing every day. It just makes it very difficult to get it done on more than one occasion because, like I said, you walk into that buck's bedroom in mid-October and you don't kill him, the game is, it either got tougher or it's over because he's going to be somewhere else. He's going to know you were in there, and it's just, that's why it's so tough for guys, like I said, to not hunt a big deer. So everything's perfect. And then once you get it perfect, you know how to get into that area without disturbing that animal. And you kill him the first time in when he's got the wind and the moon in his favor. Get in and get him out. Andre used to say he was surgically removing a big buck from the face of the earth. And that's really how you got to look at it. You're looking at it like a surgeon. Think about the amount of effort a surgeon puts into, not only, being able to practice medicine, but knowing what he needs to do in that operating room before he goes in there. And it's that black and white. I mean, you got to go in there and surgically remove that animal.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That's one that I'm gonna start using. I like it. So something you mentioned, and it's something that I've always have believed, I think, to a degree, is during that time of year, typically, if you have all these things in your favor, is it safe to say that you are usually trying to get closer to a bedding area at that time of year when you have the right conditions, when you know where the buck is? Most of those hunts, those kill sets are probably tight in the bedroom because of, like you mentioned, the fact that these bucks are using a really small area.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think those deer are moving around. In the area where I hunt in central Ohio, they're not moving very far between their bed and where they're feeding at 100, 200 yards max. So wherever you're at, you're pretty darn close to where he's bedding.
Yeah. So can you tell us?
And I've had my best luck on those sets in evening hunts. I very, very rarely ever try a morning hunt early season on those animals. But if I'm going to, if I've tried it once or twice in the evening and haven't got it done, and I know right where that animal is bedding, and then maybe I have a stand already hung in that bedding area, I will not go into that bedding area on an early season hunt until I have that red moon time 1, 2, 3 hours after daylight. I've witnessed it on a handful of occasions, seen a big, 200 class animal coming back to bed late on those overhead times late in the morning. And those were the only times that animal came back late.
Wow. So they're feeding a little later because the moon is telling them to not go back to bed yet.
Yeah, instead of that moon time hitting in the middle of the night, and they fed and they're laying down and starts cracking daylight and they're heading back and getting into their bed, before shooting light, they're actually feeding closer to daylight, and you have a better chance of them feeding, into daylight and coming back just a little bit late.
So how much of a buffer are you giving yourself when you go into those tree stands as far as time's concerned? Are you going in 2 hours early, 1 hour early?
You talking about mornings or evenings or both?
Mornings.
Well, mornings, I like to get in super early because I want everything to have a chance to calm down. And if I go in and try to dive into a bedding area in the morning, I'm taking my time. I don't want to break a twig. I don't want to bang my bow up against the stand. I don't want to do anything. I'm doing everything in slow motion because you just can't make any mistakes in a bedding area in the morning. So I give myself twice as much time as I think I need to get into my spot undetected. Literally tiptoeing into a spot and, giving myself an hour before daylight for everything to maybe calm down a little bit, and just to make sure that animal is nowhere close to the bedding area if it's at all possible when I get in there.
Yeah. And to wrap us up, we got a couple excerpts from my very first conversation on the Wired to Hunt podcast with Mark Drury. If you've listened to any of our other more recent episodes with him, you know he's a wealth of information. Here he's going to talk through some thoughts on morning hunts in October, on the October lull, on some weather factors related to October, and then some of his high-level thoughts on different phases of this month. So here we go. Now, I want to go off on a brief tangent here because Dan and I, over the past weeks and really the last year or two we've been doing this, we have an ongoing debate about morning hunts. And we asked this to our guest last week, and now you just briefly mentioned this, and it made me think about it, so I want to get your opinion real fast. Hunting mornings in October, in general, is that something you would be for or against?
I will hunt every first morning of the front and none of the others until the latter part of October. Then I will hunt every morning until about Thanksgiving. Okay.
And can you explain to us why you don't hunt all those other mornings in October?
A lack of movement and spooking deer, getting into their bedroom. They're not moving very far for the most part. It's an afternoon game. Their afternoon is like our morning. That they've been bedded all day. That's when they get up, and by early morning they're going back to bed. The first morning in the front is awesome, regardless of what the date is in October. It is amazing. That first northerly morning, I don't care if it's October 2nd or 14th or 15th, right in the middle of the lull, that morning will be phenomenal, guaranteed.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. I think it continues to evolve. Me and Dan's thoughts and opinions on this too, hearing these different perspectives, and that it makes a lot of sense waiting for the fronts. I tend to do that a lot when it comes to even the evening hunts, and it makes sense that those morning hunts could really still be great even early on with that right.
Oh, they're rocking, man. That first morning is awesome. Yeah, it's just awesome, and they're in a good mood, and they're moving around. And what happens is they stay on the feed later, right? So they're late coming back to bed. And now this is provided you're in the right spot. You can go goof any hunt up by hunting the wrong place at the wrong time. It's all about trying to get the right place at the right time. But generally, they're on the food later, and then they're going to be later coming back to bed. So therefore, you're going to see daylight activity. Whereas most mornings, without that front, they're at bed or already bedded by the time it's daybreak. That's my experience in October.
Yeah.
So on that particular instance, are you going to be hunting near the bedding area where they're coming back, or are you going to be hunting some kind of transition or pinch point to catch them coming back to their bed?
Depends on the mass crop that year. If there's a mass crop, I'm going to be somewhere on an oak flat or somewhere where there's acorns, because they're phenomenal throughout October on the cold fronts. If there's not much of a mass crop, I'm probably going to be not far off of a food plot in a known bedding area, because they're just not moving very far off of where their primary food source is.
What about specifically a morning hunt?
That's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay. I gotcha.
That's exactly what I meant. Yeah, in the mornings, that's where I would go.
In October, for those types of hunts, how early are you going to be getting into your stands in the morning?
Oh, did I lose you? Hello?
Yep. Can you hear me, Mark?
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yep. Was just curious, for those morning hunts in October, how early are you trying to get into your stand in the morning?
Fairly early. It's 30 minutes before the first thought of light. They're just not far. They're not moving very far, so you better use the cover of darkness. And if you get away with so much more during the cover of darkness than you do even at the first hint of light. It's so much easier to blow deer out at the first hint of light than when it's black dark. Did you ever notice that? Like, if you go in your stand and it's black dark, one might bounce 30 or 40 yards, but yet when it gets light, you still see that deer. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're climbing up and there's a little light, you're going to blow him plumb out of the country. I love black dark during October.
Yeah, definitely a much safer approach that way. That's for sure.
Much safer, and it's more important then than during the rut.
Now, I got a question for you. You just brought it up in one of your last comments about the October lull. All right. So what we've talked about so far is, the barometric pressure, the consistent winds, the first change in a wind direction, the cooler temperatures. Am I to assume that your definition of the October lull is the opposite of all those?
Well, the October lull, it's also what I call the October swell. There's a defined period or a defined phase in the middle part of October where they come out of their feeding pattern that they're into heavily from the time they drop the velvet until about October the 10th through the 14th. It varies year to year when they go into the lull. But from then till about October the 24th or 25th, there is a definitely subdued movement period there in October unless it's a major cold front. You have to have cold to have a decent day, in my opinion.
So in those situations where you do get, I'm going to continue to drill on these examples. Let's say now we're in that dreaded quote-unquote October lull. You do get that front. Is that just a situation where you're going to move into would you move into one of your better stands at that point? Or even though you have a front, you're still going to wait till a better time period, maybe later in the year?
No, I'll go into it, and you have to recognize what's happening during the swell. I said they go into it looking one way, and they come out looking another way. I mean, that is the buildup. That's the testosterone going from ground zero up to where it peaks to where all the daylight activity happens there during the seeking phase of the pre-rut there in late October. That period, when you do get a cold front, that's when you look back historically at your pictures and you go, where was I getting daylight activity, or where was I getting a certain buck's picture a lot during this date range? Chances are it's in and around the scrape. We always transition all of our cameras off of travel or food during the greener pastures phase. When we go into the October lull, that's the time we transition every camera we have to scrapes, because scrapes are going to absolutely light up during that phase, and you can go in the middle part of October. In fact, it is the best time to hunt scrapes is during the lull, but you need a cold front to actually get one on its feet moving.
And the one thing that we've kind of talked about interspersed throughout all these different factors is the time of the year. And you mentioned your show 13 and the fact that you guys broke down the year into 13 different phases. Could you, briefly walk us through what those phases are? We've touched on a few of them, but could you walk us through what those phases are that you guys believe are, distinct, and maybe give us a quick, your one main thing to note about each one of those phases? Is that possible?
Hold on, let me grab phase outline here. I can't do it off the top of my head. I can give you my favorites.
That'll work too.
Hold on. I do have them broke down here. Let me get to it here just a moment. The first phase is September the 15th, and this just coincides with when the Missouri season opens. It's September 15th through September 24th, and that's the phase we call the new beginning. It's if you're on one, there's a good chance you're going to kill them if you get a weather front. It's all about food source that time of year. It's all about trail pictures and your summer observation, et cetera, et cetera. I love that phase. I also love the phase that follows it, which is greener pastures, September 25th through October the 12th. To me, greener pastures is one of the best phases to kill a mature buck because there's a defoliation that goes on during this phase throughout the Midwest. And I'm only talking in terms of the hunting that I've observed here in Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas. When those beans that were planted back in May and June eventually turn from green to brown and defoliate, there is a major switch within the herd to go to the next green food source. And if you've got that green food source close to where you've seen a mature buck all summer, you're going to go through what I call green to green transfer. There's a good chance he's going to transfer from that green bean field into your green plot. The difference is the bean field might have been 40 acres and your green field might be 1 to 3 acres, a much smaller target area to try and kill that deer. That phase, to me, is one of the best of the whole year. October 13th to the 24th, we talked about the October lull. Tough phase overall, and you got to have a cold front, and mornings can be quite good. We key in on scrapes with our cameras and with our hunting tactics. We're going to key in on scrapes in and around that October lull. With still some good deer during that period because they're still on food source and they're not moving very far, but you got to have a weather front in order to do it. Pre-lock, October 25th to November the 1st. To me, this phase is all about killing the oldest, biggest deer in the herd. If you can find him, especially with those historical pictures like we were talking about, you can get on and kill that particular deer this phase. Why? Because it's one of the few phases where that really old deer is actually on his feet. He's looking for the first available doe to give the first hint of estrus. And I don't know that they're really ready to breed yet during this phase, but he's certainly ready to start tending her. They may tend 7 to 10 days before he breeds her, but you can bet one thing, that oldest buck in the herd is going to be the first one to find the one that's smelling the best. I love that phase for a really mature deer.
All right, so there you have it. A lot to take in there, I realize, in a little bit all over the place. But I think that if you take a little bit from each of these different people, you can come into this next month with a lot of different little tricks up your sleeve, I think, and some things to think about the next time you're thinking about, should I hunt this day or not? Or should I hunt this tree stand or not? Or should I worry about the October lull or not? I'm hoping that this podcast is going to give you a starting point and point you in the right direction. As I mentioned at the top, these were just little bits from much larger conversations. So go back and listen to these. Gordon Whittington was episode number 123. Dan Infalt was episode number 27. Bernie Barringer was episode number 173. Jeff Sturgis was number 77. Adam Hayes was number 69. And Mark Drury was number 63. Check those out. Each one is jam-packed with a lot more information than we just heard here. So that's going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully this provided you something helpful to kick off the month of October. It's a roller coaster, guys, and we are just beginning to head up that first hill. And I'm pumped. This is the best time of year. Enjoy it, soak it in, hunt as much as you possibly can, because don't neglect important obligations and responsibilities, of course. But I can tell you from experience that I look forward to this all year, and then the month goes by so fast, just a blink and it's gone. So for whatever kind of time and energy you can put into it, at least enjoy it, soak it in, and just realize and remember these are special, special times. So best of luck. Shoot straight, have fun, be safe, and stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
As you know, the Meat Eater live tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in Meat Eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.